College sports is going through an incredible boon in popularity, but it's nothing compared to what it was in the middle of the 19th century and the first part of the 20th century. 1852, the first intercollegiate rowing competition between Harvard and Yale had 1,000 people attend. 7 years later, in 1859, 20,000 fans attended that same race. 1869, the first college football game ever between Rutgers and Princeton led to a boon in popularity for colleges playing against each other in football, which led to the construction of all these amazing stadia and bowls that we have that were built in the early 1900s. What's the reason that college sports saw this growth once it got going? It really had to do with what universities saw not only as the educational and health benefits of having athletics part of higher education, which could be accomplished through intramural sports. But what universities learned at the time was that athletics provided a great opportunity to build community, to build awareness, to build a sense of pride, to build connectivity between former students, current students, and future students that was really unparalleled in anything else the university could do. So thank you for having me. I'm Larry Scott, Commissioner of the Pac-12 Conference. That seems like a long time ago, but interestingly, the connectivity between intercollegiate athletics and higher education is still built on the same foundational principles for the Pac-12 today as they were in the middle of the 19th century. I don't need to share with you all the challenges that higher education is facing today, and the 12 schools that I represent in the Pac-12 face many of those challenges. Financial pressures, less state funding, need to be more self-reliant, the need to be more entrepreneurial, to be more innovative, to be more marketing focused. The competition, the pressures are significant at every level. The same is true for intercollegiate athletics. The pressures are on for how our universities are able to compete in this landscape and how athletics can continue to play a vital role as the front porch for our universities. Because of all the marketing and the connection and the external activities our universities engage in, nothing creates the sense of pride, the sense of connectivity, the magnet to get people back to campus that athletics provide. So if athletics is going to continue to play a vital role for universities as they face these pressures and need to innovate, so does athletics. There are a lot of changes that have taken place in college sports over the last decades as it's become as much entertainment as it is athletics. There are increasing financial pressures. Federal laws like Title IX that require equal opportunity and equal funding for women's sports. State legislatures getting involved to want to govern. And of course, the role of television in college sports, which really, in the middle of the 20th century, exploded in terms of the sport of football, and then college football and basketball in particular becoming hugely popular in this country. So our universities have had to adapt to these times and figure out the appropriate balance between intercollegiate athletics as entertainment and as an integral role to the educational purpose of the universities. This has forced a change in the role of the conference office, and when I arrived in 2009, I came from a background of having gone to Harvard as a tennis player, was captain of the tennis team there, and really understood at that end of the spectrum where athletics is not seen as primarily entertainment, but is still close to the old Corinthian values of the role of athletics in education, really understood what athletics could mean as part of the overall educational experience for a student. I then had experience in professional tennis, both men's and women's, as the chief operating officer for the ATP and then the chairman and CEO for the WTA before I came to the Pac-10 in 2009. When I arrived, it was with a vision and a mandate from our university presidents to bring the same type of innovation and progressiveness and cutting-edge focus to athletics that our universities stand for. The universities in the Pac-10 at the time are real leaders when it comes to research and bringing together communities of people to chart the future of our country and the globe. But there was a sense that the Pac-10 conference wasn't seen the same way, and the role athletics was playing wasn't as progressive as in other parts of the country. So when I arrived, we charted a new course for a much more progressive and aggressive approach for intercollegiate athletics in our conference. Our efforts really started by focusing on the brand and what athletics could represent for our universities. Again, if athletics was still meant to be the way that universities get exposure, are able to advertise themselves to prospective students, are able to provide connective tissue for alumni, current students, prospective students, the brand of athletics has to represent the values that the universities stand for. So there are really three brand pillars for the Pac-12 that are meant to communicate this. What's unique about being on the West Coast, you see a lot of words under that pillar, a lot of great companies, a lot of great institutions on the West Coast that really celebrate not just the physical beauty and the location that we enjoy and the attractiveness of the lifestyle and the culture, but there's a certain mindset and certain attitude about tackling new frontiers that the West Coast represents. Innovation. Our universities very much stand for innovation, and the idea is, as an athletics conference, we ought to be able to reflect that and innovate more than others. And excellence. The Pac-12 has a history of winning more NCAA championships than any other, a broad-based commitment to excellence. On the men's side, the women's side, we send more Olympians to the USOC and to international Olympic teams than any other conference. So celebrating this excellence academically as well as athletically were brand pillars. An analogy I used was thinking about what a company like Apple had meant to the technology industry, a West Coast company that broke barriers, and now the mobile communications industry. Think about what Nike meant to apparel and footwear and how they took over Adidas in terms of a global leader with a very forward-looking, be prepared to take risks, very design-centric, cutting-edge mentality. That is what we used as an analogy to think about how we would chart a future course for our conference. Beyond marketing and branding, we translated this thinking, this ethos, into how we would communicate with fans. So in addition to licensing a lot of our television rights to ESPN and Fox to make sure we had the same level of exposure and could generate revenue for our athletics departments, decided to create our own media company. Pac-12 schools have some of the leading communications and film schools in the country. You think about the Cronkite School at Arizona State. You think about the Annenberg School at USC. You think about UCLA's reputation when it comes to film and television. The idea was if any conference ought to be able to engage directly with fans and understand the media business, why not the Pac-12? With these great universities that train future leaders in these industries, ought we not be able to learn that business ourselves and connect directly with fans and use our own network as a way to be masters of our own destiny when it comes to programming, when it comes to fan engagement? Why shouldn't we be able to use our own media company as an educational platform to provide internships and train students and to work with our schools in that area? So that was the impetus behind it. And our network now has 850 live events. So not only are we able to put football games and men's basketball games on the air alongside ESPN and Fox, but it's an opportunity to give exposure for sports that otherwise wouldn't get it. So sports like gymnastics, softball and baseball and water polo and tennis and golf, sports that other networks wouldn't be interested in because the ratings and the advertiser interest isn't to that level. So this is part of how we interpreted this West Coast ethos and a Pac-12 ethos to be prepared to be disruptive and do things that others hadn't done before to get directly in the media business. And certainly with the way the world is changing in that regard, now every day we're reading about big tech companies like Amazon and Facebook and Snapchat and Google now exploring the live video space and knocking at the door of live sports, wanting to get involved, all West Coast companies. It really reinforces the benefits of this type of thinking. So we now understand the business, are in the business, and I think we'll be well placed as the media landscape changes even further. There are many other initiatives that we look to focus on, always with the dual goal of what will enhance the resources, the exposure, and the competitiveness of our athletics departments, but at the same time, how can we really be true to this notion that athletics is the front porch of the university, tied to the academic mission and an asset for the university more broadly. So one example of that is globalization. Early on, coming from the world of tennis, where I was regularly traveling around the globe throughout Asia and the Middle East and Europe, where tennis is very popular, when I took over as commissioner of the Pac-10 at the time, now the Pac-12, thought I was going to be very focused on just the US and mostly the West Coast. So I was stunned when I, in my first 100 days, visited all of our campuses, had a chance to meet all of our presidents, to hear about what they were thinking about going forward, what their ambitions were for their university, and how they spent their time. And a lot of it was on globalization. In fact, in a breakfast I'll never forget with Steve Sample, who was the president of the USC at the time, he talked to me about his vision for LA and the West Coast being the gateway to the Pacific Rim, and how USC was going to use the geographic location and the kind of openness to Asia as a competitive advantage in turning USC into a true global university. That was 2009, and to see the progress that they've made in the last 8 years is pretty remarkable. So what we've done is we've taken that challenge and those goals for our universities, who are very focused on globalization in terms of building international prestige, recruiting foreign students, developing research partnerships, staying connected to their alumni that come to schools on the West Coast, get educated, and then go back home and are very successful in their particular industries, staying connected to them from a development standpoint. We thought, well, how can athletics play a role in that? So we started a Pac-12 globalization initiative, which has resulted in every year we've had teams from Pac-12 schools. We started with a focus on China, travel to China for basically goodwill mission and to compete in competitions against Chinese national teams, universities, in some cases, regular season competition. So this year will be the third year we're actually kicking off the men's basketball season with a regular season game in China. 2 years ago, we had Washington play against Texas to open the season. Last year, we had Harvard play against Stanford to open the regular season basketball. This year, it will be UCLA against Georgia Tech. The idea is that we are using athletics to support our university's efforts to brand build, to create exposure, to create community in China. Using it as a platform for leaders from our universities to go over there, invite people, engage, kind of show them what U.S. athletics, the U.S. college experience is like. And at the same time, creating great opportunities for our student athletes. Because of the fascination internationally with the brands of U.S. universities and the Pac-12 universities, there's actually now commercial interest that's developing, and we find ourselves selling television rights and entering into big sponsorship agreements with Alibaba. And this is still the very beginning, but I've looked at what the NBA did under David Stern's leadership 25 years ago, where he planted seeds and they were slow to take root, but now have exploded. And the NBA is a very big brand in China. So We're the only conference really doing this in a significant way, but we're doing it because it's genuine and supportive of the overall mission of the universities. And I'm finding that as our world becomes more flat and more interconnected, it's going to create great opportunities, not just athletically, but academically as well. One anecdote about the academic piece of this, and this was not something I could have envisioned initially. This year, for the first time, we've trained 100 athletic administrators and coaches from China at the University of Utah and another 100 at Arizona State University in a cross-departmental tailored curriculum that was designed where those 200 administrators from China came to each of those schools for 3 months. And were trained and developed. The universities got paid for that, and that is the beginning of a program that also could develop and scale. We've now got outreach from Chinese entities that want us to set up summer camps to give exposure for young students that are thinking about going to school in the United States and want to use athletics and summer training as an opportunity for foreign travel and to get some exposure to see if they might want to go to school in the US. So it's just been a great example of how athletics and a Pac-12 initiative can play a role in a broader university mission. We've tried to take that idea and build upon it when it comes to research, obviously the lifeblood for many of our universities, and an area where there's going to be more and more challenge in terms of possible decreased federal funding for research. So there's an awful lot of research going on around concussions and around health and welfare of our student athletes. But typically that's been left to the NCAA to look after, or is completely decentralized. The insight that we had was that, okay, in the Pac-12 you've got some of the leading medical schools, medical research institutions in the country. You think about UCLA's medical school, you think about Stanford's medical school, you think about Washington's medical school, right here in Salt Lake City, University of Utah, got one of the leading medical schools in the West. Isn't there an opportunity for the Pac-12 to get these schools to work together collaboratively and to be a leader nationally in concussion research? So we took some funding from the revenue from the college football playoff when that was started 3 years ago, $3.5 million per year out of the college football playoff money the Pac-12 would otherwise receive. We said, well, let's walk the walk, not just talk the talk, and let's allocate that to create some research grants that would be decided on by the leaders, the medical leaders of athletics amongst our 12 schools. So we've now got a student-athlete health conference that takes place every year. We hosted the first ever National Concussion Summit with the NCAA and the Department of Defense at UCLA in January, and we're awarding grants for research in concussion and now in other areas. It's a small step forward, but it's a very significant, for a conference that's been around for 102 years. We just celebrated our centennial 2 years ago. This philosophical shift to get into areas of collaborative research and activity using the platform that athletics gives because of the exposure and the attention and the passion that it evokes to support research, to support globalization, is what we're trying to do. This doesn't get a lot of media attention. Of course, the media loves to focus on football and basketball and whether student athletes should be paid or not, or all the media exposure. But behind the scenes, these are the seeds that we're planting to further align the mission of our universities and what they stand for with the academic primacy with athletics, knowing that athletics in this day and age is very much about entertainment. It's about external relations, but there are other things that can be done to very much directly support the academic mission as well. Technology, I know the speaker before me was talking about digital innovation as part of higher education. There's a tremendous amount of disruption going on right now in the media landscape. Everyone's reading about how ESPN has gone from the darling of the Disney portfolio to now being a drag on their earnings. But boy, how things have changed in just a few years, and a lot of that's got to do with cord cutting and how technology is playing a disruptive force. Very few young people now are sitting in front of the big screen in the living room, but mobile video consumption is through the roof. This is going to have dramatic impacts on intercollegiate athletics and television and the different business models we use to allow fans and alumni to follow our sports going forward. And of course, it's going to have dramatic impacts with higher education and learning, whether it's distance learning, whether it's MOOCs or other things. Technology and access to video are going to play a critical role. By owning our own media company and being on the West Coast with a lot of alumni within these companies that are leading this disruption and transformation, we hope we're going to be able to be at the forefront and cutting edge of that transformation, not just to the benefit of our athletics departments and our fans that want to follow their favorite sport, but also as a vehicle for learning and evolution for our universities, from whom continue to have to be more entrepreneurial, innovative, want to test new models for student engagement. And it goes beyond video. The sophistication involved in staying connected to fans these days, understanding who your fan is, and when you go through the turnstiles to watch a basketball game, the need to kind of know who that fan is and what their habits are is another area where we're trying to leverage the expertise in computer science and engineering at our universities to work on fan engagement. Data and analytics are big buzzwords in athletics these days as sports properties try to get more sophisticated in terms of understanding the habits so they can market better to potential ticket buyers and engage better with fans on TV. So we're deep into that, working with our 12 schools. But as I've explored that and had a chance to work with the chief technology officers and the chief information officers at our universities and talk to them about this notion, we want to create fans for life and not just engage with families that are attending sporting events now, but know who their children are as a marketing vehicle to attract future fans. A light went off and realized that a lot of what our CIOs and CTOs at our universities are thinking about is a notion of student for life and how they have some of the same challenges in terms of information silos and database on who their alumni are, and development's got their own, and then prospective outreach to prospective students, separate database, how you bring this data together and have effective analytics and can market better. There's interesting learnings and sharing of best practice and exchange of information that increasingly will happen between athletics and the broader university as well. Another point of interconnectivity. So it's still early in terms of working on these areas, but we've made an important philosophical shift in the last few years to not only look to add to the entertainment quotient of athletics, continue to provide great opportunities for student athletes, but increasingly in areas like globalization, data analytics, research, build bridges between the role athletics can play and the role of the broader university, so that just like 100 years ago, when we saw this explosion of the interest in rowing and the interest in college football, college athletics continues to be an important driver for building community, building passion, building exposure, interest, and relevance for our universities in an increasingly competitive landscape. Thank you.